Hey everybody, so instead of the weekly overview video, I just wanted to talk about seasonality real quick and some of the major stocks that are making up the S&P 500. So rather than actually looking at the S&P 500 technicals or the QQQ itself, I'm looking at the underlying assets behind it. So this last week was very, very interesting. We had plenty of earnings, and I honestly felt like a lot of those earnings were underwhelming. We saw a serious deceleration in revenue growth. So to me, that's a little bit worrisome because you have to remember when people are paying high multiples for stocks, they're paying those high multiples because of that revenue growth and potential future growth. But we just saw 2 quarters of negative GDP. We're seeing revenues come in weaker. So, that's kind of got me scratching my head, honestly. And I'm not sure if the rally that we just saw, is that just another bear market rally? And are we going to see an accelerated sell off? So, there's definitely some conflicting news here. We're seeing the technicals look positive, but the macros look horrible, in my opinion. And, we did just get another interest rate hike, and that was 0.75. So, you know, um, I would say right now, we kind of just got to let this move digest and see where we go from here. So when I am looking at the seasonality, it's pretty clear that here in June, we're very bearish. And then here in July, we were very bullish. Now, it may not have followed this exact trajectory, but, we did see that strong sell off and a strong rally. And we did actually see the end of July have a very overbought reaction right here. So if we're looking at seasonality here, it's calling for a drop in early August and some chop as well. So we will see if that happens. Now, September, generally in September, it's a pretty bearish month, but you can see in the seasonality that, there is a strong rally somewhere in between, and then that's when that trap happens and there's a big sell off. So I would be cautious of any rallies that we see in September. So moving forward, let's just take a look at some of the major positions in the S&P 500. So obviously the biggest is going to be Apple. Now there's two things I want to pay attention to. It's these two trend lines right here. So let's just go ahead and let's dissect each one of them. So I'm going to remove that one first. So if you look at this trend line, it's connecting this former top here in 2020. It's going through this gap zone right here. So we do have a gap that's never been filled. It's right here in this, I would say like it's 99 to 96 is the gap zone. But if you do look, it's going through that gap zone. It's touching all these supports right here. And if we look right here, it did touch this support. It did kind of hit this as resistance. And if you look right now, that's exactly where we are sitting at, basically right on this trend line. So, let's say that we get another bullish rally. Let's just say we break above this trend line, and then let's say we fall, and then we rebound and we bounce off that. To me, that would be very, very bullish. But if you did watch my Apple video, I was talking, Apple right now is sitting close to 27 PE multiples, and we're seeing revenue growth. Last quarter was only 2%. So to me, that is a cause of concern. Is this Apple rally just a fake rally and it's just trapping a bunch of bulls? So we will see that if that is the case. Now let's take a look at the second line. So if I introduce the second line, for you to see this very clearly, I need to remove this line right here. So this second line is the one that we were talking about before. So this one I was saying would be pretty big resistance. So as you can see, it'll support right there, right there, right there, and throughout this entire move right there. And then it acted as resistance right here, and then you can kind of see that we slightly poked above this. And you can see once we actually broke past this, we had that strong rally. So, if we do pull back, I would think that going back, filling this gap, and then probably falling a little bit under, possibly bouncing off of this prior resistance could be a scenario. So this would act as support in the future. So that is something I am paying attention to. And now let's go ahead and let's bring this line back in. So my belief in the shorter term is if we do fade a little bit from here, there is quite a potential that we could just start moving within this channel right here. So that would be an interesting development. And if we do fall below this line right here, well then the next area of support I would look towards is possibly this right here. See if we actually bounce back from here and then get back in this area. And then the next one would probably be this right here. So we'll see if we bounce off either one of these. But long story short, there is quite a bit of support here. Now, I do want to note on a shorter time frame, we do have this gap. So if we're looking at this gap, the bottom is right around 157.50. And the top of this gap zone is right around 159.50. So if we do fade a little bit, maybe we're going to go for this gap next week or possibly in a possibly by the end of August. So we'll see if that happens. But as long as there are these gaps to the downside, I would not be too bullish, especially given how overbought we are. Let me introduce the Bollinger Bands. So if you see these Bollinger Bands, we are seriously peaking out of this, and we are hitting that prior resistance trend line that goes back several years. So this is an interesting development that I am watching. I would watch this very closely if I were you, just given the weight of Apple on many of these major ETFs. So let's take a look at Microsoft. There also is another very interesting thing developing here. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can see this trend line, and we can see essentially it's been catching all of this support right here for the longest time. And then you can see we broke below it, and we tried rallying. We got rejected by it, and now we're in the same exact area where we have this upper resistance right here that's connecting that resistance, this one, and that one, along with this former support right here that now could act as resistance. So this does bring us to a very pivotal area. And let's go ahead and look at the Bollinger Bands. Now we are also severely overextended on the Bollinger Bands. Let's go on a shorter time frame and let's look for that gap. So here we see a very big gap. This was from earnings. So we have a gap to the downside of 252.52. And the top of this gap is right around 159. So we've got a pretty big gap to fill. So this is kind of what leads me to believe that we're not just going straight to the moon next. I do believe that we could get something close to our former low or possibly even lower, because we do have all of these gaps to fill to the downside. So that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm not still very bullish. I'm kind of neutral, just waiting to see what happens, because I still do believe that a lot of these technicals are looking much better, and a lot of these major mega caps are above the 50-day moving average now. So if we're just looking back here, let's introduce the moving averages. We're clearly above the 50-day. Let's go back, let's look at Apple. Clearly above the 50-day right here. So, we have some distance from the 50-day moving average. And we're actually above the 200-day moving average now too. So next is Google. So I think Google is just very interesting right now. So we do have, to me, this kind of does look like a bear flag, but we have been going sideways for quite a bit. So there is a potential that we could break out. And if we do break out of this area, so let's say we make it back above, what's the area? So if we do start closing above 119, I do believe we could see a pretty strong rally off Google. So I'm definitely paying attention to Google here. We have just been chopping around sideways from around 104 to this 119 area for quite a while. So we'll see if we actually break out of it. And if we do break out of that, does that essentially mean that Microsoft will pull back, Apple will pull back, or will they all rally together? Because it would not surprise me if Apple fades a little bit, Microsoft fades a little bit, and maybe Google has its turn to shine. And then that just essentially leaves us pretty flat on S&P 500 and NASDAQ. So to me, that would be something interesting to watch out for. Now, Amazon is really interesting as well because look, on Amazon, we do have this gap right here, and we're pretty much looking like we're going to fill that gap. So that gap is right there at 140.26. So what happens if we fill that gap? I mean, if we do fill that gap, are we just going to rally higher or are we going to fade from there? So, that is a pretty strong resistance area in my opinion. So let's just zoom out a little bit. So this is kind of like a pocket where, things could get a little dangerous right from this 134 or 135 area to 140. So we are leaving quite a bit of gaps on Amazon. So let's go over to the shorter time frame. I mean, this gap is pretty darn big. So we got this gap that takes us all the way from 122 to essentially 132 to 122. And then we also have the smaller gap right here. This is right around 115 to 117. So Amazon has all these gaps to the downside. So that's just another reason, why I'm not crazy bullish right now. Too many gaps on the downside, and a lot of the times these gaps do get filled. Lastly, let's take a look at the VIX. If we're looking at the VIX right here, we are essentially on support. So you can see right here, we bounce right there, there, right there, right there, and that's exactly where we are right now. So, we'll see if VIX does bounce from here. And if it does bounce from here, it could bounce quite significantly. So let's go back. Let's look at this seasonality chart. So as you guys can see, it's showing a pretty steep decline in the beginning of August. So along with a lot of chop. So that could invite more volatility here for the month of August. So we will see how this plays out. And we are starting to see that China-Taiwan FUD come back in the news. So we'll see if that is going to be the catalyst that does bring the next market sell-off. So I hope this video was informative and have a great one, you guys.